No nanny survived 3 days with Millionaire's triplets until she arrived and did the impossible. On a seaside hill in California stood a vast white mansion overlooking the deep blue ocean. By day it blazed with sunlight, but when night fell, it sank into a heavy silence, the kind that made one feel as if the place had forgotten how to breathe. Locals called it the house without laughter. Inside that house lived Ethan Cole, founder of a major tech corporation, a genius in the world of machines, but a lost man in the world of emotions. Since the death of his wife Rachel 3 years ago, Ethan had not been the same. He worked almost without sleep, living among numbers and projects, as if each data file could help him forget the unnameable loss that haunted him. The Cole mansion, though magnificent, was no different from a glass tomb. No music, no voices, and above all, no laughter of children. It was said that within a single month, 10 nannies had left the mansion, many in tears. Not because of the pay. Ethan was generous, the rooms luxurious, the meals lavish. The problem lay in the 3 little girls who lived in the East Wing, Chloe, Lila, and Emma Cole, identical triplets. Chloe, the eldest, always frowned as if the whole world had wronged her. Lila, the middle one, loved mischief, chaos, and playing tricks like a tiny anarchist artist. Emma, the youngest, was quiet and withdrawn, but her eyes, deep, bright, and sad, seemed to hold an entire sky of hidden secrets. These 3 little girls drove nannies away in terror. Some said they heard laughter echoing through the hallway before objects shattered. Others swore the girls replaced sugar with salt, poured water on carpets, or shouted eerie phrases in unison that made adults shiver. But what no one saw was the silent pain behind their mischief. They were only 7 years old, 3 small souls doing whatever they could to make their father notice them. One morning, as sunlight danced on the sea, the butler, Mr. Davis, passed the hallway and heard a faint sob. A nanny was dragging her suitcase away, crying. Between sobs, she said, "No one can stand them. They're not children, they're little demons." The main door closed, and once again, silence returned. The 3 girls stood on the stone path. Chloe watched the nanny leave, her dark eyes full of sorrow. Lila crossed her arms and smirked. 4 days. She lasted longer than the last one. Emma said nothing. She only whispered, "Dad will say again that we're trouble." In his upstairs office, Ethan Cole stood by the glass window, watching his daughters quietly walking along the path. His face was cold as marble, his eyes distant. He loved them, but no longer knew how to show it. When Mr. Davis entered, Ethan asked without turning around, "She's gone?" "Yes, sir. The 10th nanny this month." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Hire another, quickly." Mr. Davis hesitated. "Sir, I'm afraid no one else dares to come anymore." The air in the room grew heavy. Ethan looked toward the restless sea, the reflection of his own turmoil staring back. "It's not the princess's fault," Mr. Davis murmured softly. "No," Ethan replied, his voice low and cold. "It's theirs." Outside, the sky over the coast darkened, as if the sea itself held its breath. The next afternoon, a yellow taxi stopped before the massive iron gates of the Cole mansion. The driver glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the young woman in the back seat clutching the handle of an old suitcase. Her name was Grace Miller. Deep, gentle brown eyes, neatly tied hair, and slightly worn shoes. No one would have guessed that this simple woman was about to step into a place so many others had fled from. As the gates opened, the sound of metal echoed through the air, as if announcing the start of a new journey. The gatekeeper looked her up and down and gave a bitter laugh. "So you're the new one? Hope you like running. Nobody lasts more than 3 days here." Grace took a deep breath and smiled softly. "I didn't come to last a few days. I came to stay." Then she pulled her suitcase along the stone path. Ahead stood the white mansion, gleaming in the afternoon sun, breathtakingly beautiful, yet cold as ice. On the front steps, Mr. Davis, the longtime butler of the Cole family, was waiting. He eyed her with quiet scrutiny and spoke in a dry tone. "Miss Miller?" "Yes, sir." "I must warn you, this place is unlike any home you've ever worked in. Here, people don't quit because they're tired. They quit because they're afraid." Grace answered calmly, "I know how to take care of children. I'll be fine." Mr. Davis gave a short laugh, one that carried no trace of belief. "They all say that before they run." As she stepped inside, Grace immediately felt the chill of the house, not the chill of air conditioning, but of emotional absence. The marble-walled hallway stretched endlessly, bare of color, bare of warmth. The only sound was that of her own footsteps, echoing as though she were walking inside the heart of a man who no longer had one. The only person who smiled at her was Mrs. Turner, the elderly cook. Wiping her hands on her apron, the woman murmured kindly, "Good luck, dear. Around here, people need more heart than money." Grace smiled back in gratitude, not yet fully understanding what she meant. Then Mr. Davis led her to the East Wing, the domain of the 3 triplet girls. When the door opened, Grace stopped. The 3 little girls sat on a sofa, dressed alike, their hair braided neatly, their eyes unusually bright. No one spoke, no one smiled. The air was thick, as though those 6 eyes were quietly measuring the newcomer's every breath. Grace knelt down, smiling warmly. "Hello, my dears. I'm Grace. I'm here to take care of you and be with you." Lila, the middle child, squinted mischievously. "How long are you staying? 3 days? Like the others?" Her sisters chuckled softly. Grace didn't look flustered. She moved closer, kneeling to meet their gaze. "Well, if it's only 3 days, then let's make those 3 days the best ones ever." The girls exchanged surprised glances. No one had ever answered like that before. Chloe, the eldest, crossed her arms and asked sternly, "You're not afraid of us?" Grace smiled. "Afraid? Only if you were hungry tigers, but all I see here are 3 lovely girls." For the first time, Emma, the youngest, lifted her head. In her quiet eyes flickered a spark of curiosity. Then came the first test. While Grace was setting the table, Lila deliberately spilled a glass of water. "Oops, my hand slipped." Instead of scolding, Grace picked up a towel and said kindly, "That's all right. Everyone makes mistakes sometimes. Want to help me clean it up?" The girls froze. They were used to shouting, not gentleness. At dinner came the second trick. They switched the salt with sugar. When Grace tasted the soup, she simply raised an eyebrow. "Oh my, a new recipe? Which of you brilliant chefs made this?" Lila burst out laughing. Chloe tried to stay serious, but the corner of her lips twitched. Emma covered her mouth, giggling. Grace looked at them tenderly. "Tomorrow you'll have to teach me more of your special recipes, okay?" Something changed in the air. For the first time in months, laughter filled the room, clear and crystalline as glass. From afar, Ethan Cole stood still, watching. He couldn't remember the last time he'd heard his daughters laugh. His face hardened again as he turned away, speaking in a cold voice to Mr. Davis beside him. "She won't last. No one ever does." But deep inside, he knew. Something had just stirred within his heart, a sound he hadn't heard in years, the faint crack of ice beginning to break. Night fell over the California coast. From the upstairs window, Ethan Cole stood motionless, watching the faint light glowing from the east wing of the mansion, the place where his daughter's laughter had echoed earlier that day. That laughter, strange, distant, unfamiliar, unsettled him. Yet it stirred something inside his heart that he couldn't quite explain. Since Rachel died, Ethan had not stepped into his daughter's room once. He told everyone he was too busy, but the truth was simpler. He was afraid. Afraid of memories. Afraid of seeing in his daughter's eyes the reflection of the woman he couldn't save. He quietly opened the door to his office. The room was dark, lit only by the pale glow of his laptop screen against his tense face. On the desk lay a framed photo of Rachel, turned face down. He hadn't dared to set it upright in 3 years. "I can't let emotions make me weak," he used to tell himself. But tonight, the sound of 3 little girls laughing had caused the first crack in the walls of ice he'd built around his heart. In the East Wing, Grace Miller was still awake. She had just finished reading bedtime stories to the girls. As she turned off the lamp, she heard a whisper. "Chloe, are you asleep?" Lila's soft voice. "No, be quiet." "I just wanted to ask, do you think Mommy can hear us?" The question froze them all. Moonlight spilled across their pillows, glimmering like tears. Outside the door, Grace stood still, her heart tightening. She remembered her own childhood, a small room, the ticking of a clock, and long nights with no one to sing her to sleep. She had once asked the same question, her voice hoarse from crying. "Mom, can you hear me?" Grace stepped inside quietly and sat beside their bed. "You know," she said softly, "when someone truly loves you, they never really leave. Your mom isn't gone. She's just somewhere your hearts can still reach when you remember her." Emma, the youngest, turned toward her, eyes glistening. "Do you really think our mom can hear us?" Grace nodded gently. "I do, because I used to talk to my mom the same way." The 3 girls stared at her. Chloe whispered, "You lost your mom too?" "Yes," Grace said with a sad smile. "Many years ago, but sometimes when I cook or listen to music, I still feel her right beside me." No one spoke again, only the moonlight remained, and the quiet warmth of understanding. The next morning, during breakfast, Ethan entered the dining room with his usual cold composure. The 3 girls, who had been laughing with Grace, instantly fell silent. He frowned but said nothing. The air thickened, as if laughter itself were forbidden here. Grace broke the silence gently. "Breakfast is delicious, isn't it, girls?" Chloe glanced at her father, then nodded slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, it is." Ethan lifted his gaze to her, eyes hard as steel. "I didn't hire you to distract them. I hired you to keep them in line." Grace didn't bow her head. Her tone was calm, but firm enough for everyone to hear. "Children can't grow in silence, Mr. Cole. They need to laugh, to speak, to feel that they're still loved." The air froze. Mr. Davis and Mrs. Turner both held their breath. Ethan set his coffee cup down, voice low. "You've been here less than 48 hours. You don't understand this house." Grace gave a faint smile. "Perhaps not, but I understand children, and I know silence is the fastest way to break a small heart." Ethan didn't reply. He stood up and walked out. But as the door closed, the 3 girls looked at Grace differently. For the first time, someone had said aloud what they'd always wished to hear. That night, as Grace walked down the hallway, she heard a quiet sob. She opened the door slightly and saw Emma sitting on her bed, hugging her pillow, tears streaming down her cheeks. Grace went to her, gently brushing her hair. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" "I dreamed about Mommy. She went far away. I called her, but she didn't turn back." Grace gathered her into her arms. "It's okay, darling. When you dream of your mom, it means she's still trying to find her way to you." Emma buried her face in Grace's shoulder, her tears soaking into the woman's blouse. Out in the hallway, Ethan stood in the shadows, hearing every word. He wanted to step in, but stopped himself. Something caught in his throat. He turned away, fists clenched, struggling to contain the emotions he had buried for 3 long years. Inside the room, Grace still held the child, whispering softly, "You're not alone, Emma. You have me, your sisters, and your dad too. He just sometimes forgets how to show it." That night, for the first time, the Cole mansion found peace. Not because it was silent, but because someone had finally learned to listen. In the days that followed, the atmosphere inside the Cole mansion began to change. It was no longer the lifeless house it once was. Now there were quick footsteps echoing through the marble halls, bursts of giggles bouncing off the walls, small traces of life returning to its frozen heart. Still, Ethan kept his distance. He only watched from afar, convincing himself that all this was just a temporary phase. Meanwhile, Grace kept finding new ways to reach the 3 girls. She realized that each one carried her own kind of armor. Chloe hid her sadness behind coldness, Lila used laughter to cover loneliness, and Emma took refuge in silence. One afternoon, sunlight streamed through the tall windows, painting golden ribbons across the floor. Grace sat with the girls in the library. On the table lay a neat stack of white papers. "Today we're going to play a new game," she said mysteriously. "Not another prank?" Lila tilted her head. "No," Grace smiled. "This one's only for the brave." The 3 girls exchanged curious glances. Grace picked up a sheet of paper and began to fold. Her fingers moved gently, gracefully, as if telling a story through each crease. When she finished, the paper had become a small bird, its wings spread, ready to fly. "This is a paper bird," Grace explained. "My grandmother taught me how to make these when I was little. Each bird carries a secret, something you've never dared to say out loud." Emma's eyes widened. "Will it really fly away?" Grace chuckled. "Not exactly. It'll fly to a safe place, to the heart of someone who knows how to listen." She handed each girl a sheet of paper. "Write or draw anything you want to say, but have never said before. No one gets to read it unless the person who wrote it allows it." At first, the girls hesitated. Then Lila, always the bold one, giggled and began to write. Chloe bit her pen, deep in thought. Emma stared at her blank sheet for a long while before drawing delicate, winding lines with her pencil. When they were done, Grace gathered the paper birds and placed them in a small wooden box. "This will be our secret box," she said. "Everyone has the right to keep things inside their heart, but sometimes sharing a little makes it feel lighter." The next day, Lila approached Grace with a small paper bird. "You can read this one," she said proudly. Grace unfolded it. Inside, in wobbly handwriting, were the words, "I wish Mommy was still here to laugh with me." Grace's throat tightened. She held the paper gently, smiling through misty eyes. "Thank you, sweetheart. You just helped your mom hear that." From that day on, the paper bird game became their little nightly ritual. Each evening, the 3 sisters folded, wrote, and placed their birds inside the box. Chloe never let anyone read hers, but each time she finished folding, she exhaled, as if releasing something heavy from her chest. A week passed, and the change was unmistakable. Lila laughed more freely, Emma started talking more often, and Chloe had begun to look at Grace with less suspicion and more warmth. One rainy afternoon, while they were drawing in the library, Chloe walked up to Grace and held out a small paper bird. "This one. You can read," she said softly, her voice trembling but her gaze firm. Grace unfolded it. The message was written quickly, the letters slightly slanted, but strong. "I want Daddy to hug me again." Grace said nothing. She simply placed her hand on Chloe's shoulder. "Thank you, Chloe. One day your dad will hold you again. I promise." At the end of the hallway, hidden in the shadows, Ethan Cole had heard every word. That short sentence pierced straight through his heart like a thin, sharp blade. For the first time in 3 years, his eyes burned with tears. But instead of stepping forward, he turned away, his fists clenched, fighting to keep his heart from breaking open with them. That night, after the girls had fallen asleep, Grace sat alone beside the box of paper birds. She didn't read them. She simply placed her hand on the lid as if touching the souls of the children who were learning how to love again. Far in the distance, the sound of ocean waves crashed against the shore, steady, rhythmic, like the heartbeat of the house itself. For the first time, the Cole mansion was alive again. Since that rainy afternoon, the Cole mansion had become a different world. The once sterile halls that echoed with servants' footsteps now pulsed with laughter. The triplets no longer hid in shadows. They ran, painted, played with Grace, and filled the house with a life it hadn't known in years. But for Ethan Cole, that change wasn't entirely comforting. He wasn't used to noise or chaos. Most of all, he wasn't used to feeling like he was losing control in his own home. One morning, while Ethan reviewed documents in the library, Mr. Davis entered, hesitant. "Sir, the girls, they're playing in the garden." "Playing?" Ethan frowned. "They're supposed to be in French lessons." Miss Miller said, "Sometimes children learn better when they're free." Ethan slammed the folder shut and rose abruptly. "Freedom doesn't teach discipline, Davis. Bring her here." Grace entered the library, her dress still speckled with traces of mud from the garden. Ethan's cold stare sliced through the room like a blade. "What exactly do you think you're doing here, Miss Miller?" Grace placed her hands calmly on the desk. Her voice was soft but steady. "I'm helping your daughters find their childhood again." "Childhood isn't an excuse to turn my home into a circus," Ethan retorted. "This house has been dead for a long time, Mr. Cole," Grace replied quietly. "I'm only helping it breathe again." The words struck him like a silent blow. For a brief second, his eyes flickered with something human, before he hid it away again. "You're overstepping your place. I don't pay for sentiment. I pay for order." Grace drew a slow breath, her tone calm. "Sir, sometimes order isn't what children need most. They need to feel safe and loved." "You don't know anything about loss," Ethan snapped. "You have no idea what it means to lose someone." Silence filled the room. Light from the window cut across his face, the face of a man carrying more pain than he dared admit. Grace took a step closer. "You're wrong. I do know. I was a child who lost her mother. I know what it's like to be left alone in silence. But unlike you, I chose to remember, not to forget." Ethan clenched his jaw and turned away. "Leave. I don't want to hear more." "But your daughters do," Grace said, her voice trembling yet firm. "They don't need a perfect father, just a real one." Ethan turned back, eyes red with anger and something else. "Get out!" Grace didn't argue. She looked at him for a long moment, not with defiance but with compassion, and quietly left. That afternoon, anger still burned inside Ethan. He wandered through the house, trying to drown in work, but the sound of laughter from the garden made him stop by the window. The girls were playing their paper bird game again. The birds soared through the air, glinting in the sun like fragments of free memories. He saw Chloe look up and laugh, genuinely, freely. That smile. It was Rachel's smile. His chest tightened. The pain and tenderness mixed so powerfully that he gripped the window frame to steady himself. "Rachel, what would you do if you were here?" he whispered. Outside, Grace helped Emma fix a torn paper wing. "It's okay, sweetheart. When wings break, we can fold them again, and they'll still fly." Ethan heard those words through the glass, and his throat closed. Not because she said them to his daughter, but because he knew they were meant for him too. That evening, Ethan skipped dinner. He sat alone in the library, staring at a small wooden box Mr. Davis had left on his desk. He said the girls wanted him to keep it safe. Ethan opened it and unfolded one paper bird. Inside, written in shaky letters, "I miss Mom, but I miss Dad too." For the first time in years, Ethan bowed his head. His hands trembled, and a tear slipped onto the paper, blurring the ink, but not the meaning. That night, the rain had stopped, leaving the air fresh and strangely still. From the window of his study, Ethan Cole gazed out at the back garden, where wet paper birds clung to the grass, their wings half folded, unable to fly. He quietly opened the window, breathing in the salty scent of the sea. For 3 years, he had lived like a shadow, eating because he must, sleeping because he was tired, working to forget. But tonight, a single piece of paper with the words, "I miss Dad," had made the frozen wall inside him tremble. He closed his eyes, and Rachel's image came rushing back, her hands on his shoulders, her gentle voice. "Ethan, don't let work swallow what truly matters." He opened his eyes abruptly. Only emptiness greeted him. He sat down and unfolded the same paper bird again, as if afraid he hadn't read it enough. "I miss Mom, but I miss Dad too." Those childlike words echoed in his mind, dragging him back to the memory of Rachel's last day, the day he hadn't come home in time to say goodbye. The library door creaked open. Grace Miller entered quietly, holding a cup of tea. "I'm sorry if I'm intruding. I thought maybe you hadn't eaten dinner?" Ethan didn't look at her. His voice was low, rough. "You always seem to know when to show up, don't you?" Grace placed the cup on the desk and sat across from him. "Not really. I just think, when silence lasts too long, someone should sit with it." They stayed quiet for a while. The distant sound of waves filled the room. "They love you?" Ethan said softly. "The girls. I haven't seen them like this since Rachel." "Because they don't need perfection," Grace replied. "They just need someone who listens." He looked up, his eyes lost, fragile like a child's. "How do you stop the pain?" Grace smiled sadly. "I never did, Mr. Cole. I just learned to turn pain into memory. When you try to forget, you only lose more. But when you remember, you keep them close through love." Ethan was silent for a long time. Under the warm lamplight, his face softened, no longer hard, just tired and hollow. "I'm afraid if I remember, I'll fall apart," he whispered. "Falling apart isn't the worst thing," Grace answered gently. "Standing behind cold walls forever, that's worse. At least when you fall, you know you're still alive." Her words made him shiver. He looked at her for a long moment, seeing, perhaps for the first time, a person not afraid to stand in the same storm with him. After a while, Grace rose and walked toward the large bookshelf. "These books are beautiful. Did you ever read them to your daughters?" Ethan shook his head. "Rachel did. She loved telling stories. I never knew what to say except about work." Grace smiled, opening a page. "Maybe it's time you tried again. They don't need a perfect story. They just need their father's voice." Ethan chuckled faintly. "I wouldn't even know where to start." "Start with hello," Grace said softly. That night, before bed, the triplets were startled to see their father standing at their door. Ethan Cole, who for 3 years had said goodnight only through messages, now stood there in person, holding an old storybook. "Would you like me to read to you?" The girls froze. Chloe's eyes widened, Lila gasped, Emma nearly forgot to breathe. Then slowly, all 3 nodded. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed. His voice trembled through the first few lines. But soon, something shifted. The words began to flow. The girls leaned closer, resting their heads on his shoulder. Every breath, every heartbeat merged into a quiet song, the song of returning home. At the end of the hall, Grace stood watching, a soft smile on her lips. She knew then, without a promise, that what she once told Chloe had finally come true. One day, your dad will hug you again. I promise. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the windows, painting the white curtains gold. In the garden, the triplets played among lavender flowers, laughter echoing through the air. Grace stood on the porch, a cup of tea in her hands, smiling as she watched them. For the first time, she saw Ethan Cole step outside without his laptop. He paused for a long moment, his gaze lost in the scene before him. Then slowly, he walked down the steps. The girls froze in surprise. Emma whispered, "Dad, you want to play with us?" Ethan nodded slightly, his voice awkward, uncertain. "Yes, if I'm allowed to." Laughter erupted. Chloe ran to him, placing a piece of chalk in his hand. "Draw a bridge with us." Ethan knelt down, his hand trembling as the chalk touched the tiles. His lines were crooked and clumsy, but the girls cheered as if he'd painted a masterpiece. Grace watched from afar, her heart swelling. She knew that was the moment he became a father again. Morning light glimmered on the raindrops along the windows, sparkling like crystals. The Cole mansion was no longer the gloomy place it once was. From the living room came laughter. Ethan Cole was trying to tie Emma's hair, while Chloe and Lila insisted on brushing his to make it fair. Grace stood by the doorway, holding a tray of pastries. She laughed softly at the sight of his messy hair. "You look more like a man defeated than a stern father, Mr. Cole." He turned, his gaze softer than ever. "Maybe I should lose more often." Grace blushed, setting the tray down. Ethan stepped closer, gently taking her hand. "Thank you, Grace, not just for staying, but for helping me see life again." She smiled faintly. "You've always seen it, Ethan. You just forgot to open your eyes." The days that followed changed everything. Ethan spent time with his daughters each day, driving them to school, sharing dinners, reading bedtime stories. People said he'd lost his edge, his icy discipline as a businessman, but to Grace and the girls, it was simply called happiness. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, Grace and the girls went out to the garden to release new paper birds, each carrying a wish. Emma wished that Mom Rachel could smile in heaven. Chloe wished for Dad to always laugh, and Lila wrote, "Please don't let Miss Grace ever leave." From afar, Ethan watched, his heart softening. He knew now, some people come into your life not to replace what's lost, but to heal what's broken. That night, moonlight bathed the garden in silver. Grace sat on the porch, writing in her journal, when footsteps approached. "You scared me," she said with a quiet laugh. "Didn't mean to," Ethan replied, his voice warm. "I just wanted to ask, would you stay? Not as the nanny." Grace looked up wide-eyed. "What do you mean?" Ethan knelt, pulling a small box from his pocket. Inside was a simple silver ring that gleamed beneath the moon. "Grace Miller, you brought laughter back to this house, hope to my daughters, and to me. A reason to love again. I don't know if I deserve you, but if you'll have me, I want you to be my wife. Not because the girls need you, but because I do." Tears welled in Grace's eyes, but her smile was radiant. "Ethan Cole, you don't need to be perfect. Just promise you'll never leave our laughter behind again. Mine included." He rose and held her tightly. The three girls peeked from the doorway, squealing, "Dad's proposing to Miss Grace." "I knew it." "Put the ring on, Dad. Hurry." Laughter filled the night air, mixing with the soft summer breeze. A month later, the wedding took place in the garden. No grandeur, no crowd, just sunlight, lavender blooms, and the laughter of those they loved most. Chloe, Lila, and Emma, dressed as tiny bridesmaids, scattered white petals as Grace walked down the aisle. Ethan looked at her, the woman who had walked through the storm with him, and for the first time there was no trace of doubt in his eyes. When the priest asked, "Do you promise to love her with all your heart through sun and storm alike?" Ethan's voice was steady as the sea breeze. "I do. Because of her, I've learned what it means to truly live." Grace's tears shimmered as she smiled. "And I promise to remind you that happiness doesn't come from perfection, but from moments that are real." When they shared their first kiss, the girls cheered and released dozens of paper birds into the sky. The white wings spun in the sunlight, glimmering as if Rachel's spirit smiled from above, blessing them. As the paper birds vanished into the blue sky, their white wings caught the sunlight like fragments of hope. And for the first time, the Cole mansion breathed, alive, warm, and filled with the sound of laughter that would never fade again.